I've told you before about how my dad was in the United States Coast Guard growing up, so typically I lived in military housing or military subsidized housing, often in townhouses, not always in the best neighborhood or the best keep, but my dad retired in 1997, and when he retired, we had to move out of military housing. And so for the first time of my entire childhood, at 17 years old, my parents bought a house. This was it. Little house in a place called West Allis, Wisconsin. Not West Dallas, but A-L-L-I-S. West Allis, Wisconsin. Right across the street from this house was the Milwaukee Mile. If any of you like kart racing, which is like IndyCar, but the break-off, they would have a race there every year. And I always tried to beg my mom in the 2 times that I lived there if I could climb up on that roof through her bedroom window in the front and watch the race, and she never would let me. There were also, the state fair was there, so they would have concerts. I'd ask her if I could go watch that. No. During the 2000 presidential election, George Bush came and spoke across the street from my house, and I asked her, surely you will let me climb on the roof to watch the future president speak? No, still no. I remember them buying the house, and I remember how much they bought the house for, and my high school 1998 mind could not comprehend figures this large. $120,000 in 1998. Now, my dad would end up passing away just a few years later of cancer. He died in 2004. And so my mom decided it was too much house for just her. My sister and I were both, I was married and out of the house. My sister was finishing college. And so she decided to sell the house and move into a condo. And when she sold the house in 2005, she got $179,000. That's a pretty good return of investment. Very, very good. But I decided that this week I wanted to check out how much this house was worth now. Now, this is not a massive house. It's bigger than it looks, kind of a long house. The schools that I went to aren't zoned to this house anymore. And so I looked at Zillow's ratings of the schools today, a 1 out of 10, 1 out of 10, and 2 out of 10 for the high school. That was my rival high school. They stink. No doubt they're a 2 out of 10. But I thought, well, it couldn't have gone up that much. The house is getting older. The schools are getting worse. How much would it be if it went for sale today? $312,600. Who in their right mind would spend $300,000 to live in Milwaukee, Wisconsin? I don't understand. I couldn't believe this. In just 20 years, it's nearly doubled in price. And so you may be wondering, why do I tell you all of this? You all know that the financial housing market is out of crazy. You know that prices are expensive. You know all of this. Well, we've been talking about fears this month, and today I want to talk about one of the major fears that Americans have, and that's financial ruin. That we are at risk of going broke. And so I want to walk through some statistics about how money has changed that I think creates the anxiety that we have at this particular cultural moment. I read this week about how much money in the 1970s you had to have $100 worth of buying power today. And I thought that surely this couldn't be correct. So I went to the inflation calculator. Do you ever use the inflation calculator on the internet? I love that thing so much. I love it so much. But I heard, and this turns out to be true, that $12.90 in 1972 is $100 today. Less than $13 in 1972. I figured that this was a long time ago when I learned that this was before Brian was born, Brian Eisentraut. So I know it's a long time ago. But still, that's a shocking amount of money. And so I thought, it seems like there's been another real jump ever since COVID in 2020. And so I thought, well, how much money did you have to have in 2020 to have $100 today? Before you change it, does anyone? Oh, you changed it. You got me. All right, there it is. $80 basically 5 years ago is $100 today. That is a wild change in 5 years. That's an incredible change. And so, of course, salaries are not keeping up with that. Housing is raising. It is not that surprising that there is an anxiety in our culture about money right now. And if that isn't enough, you may be convinced, you may not be convinced, but I'm going to convince you with even more statistics, all right? I know you all came here for money statistics today. I'm sorry for this, but it's worth considering to really set the stage for why there's an anxiety. All right, this is all these statistics on this next slide are from Dave Ramsey and his company. 37% of Americans have more credit card debt than retirement savings. No gasps or oohs or ahs to that. That's a scary statistic, isn't it? 77% of American workers are living paycheck to paycheck. 22.4 million Americans cannot afford their rent. Americans have $1.2 trillion in credit card debt. Only 34% of Americans feel that they're on track for retirement savings. 43% of Americans have difficulty paying their bills. That's almost half. The price of food has become the number one concern of Americans over the price of gas and the cost of housing. If you're an adult who's been an adult like me, you can remember seasons where housing was the biggest concern. And you can remember seasons where gas was the biggest concern. I remember during the war in Iraq in 2005, 2006, I was a young adult, and I was shuddering over $4 a gallon for gas. Shuddering. How am I going to pay for that? But now we've gotten to the point that just securing food has become more of a concern than housing or gas. And 61% of Americans say that the economy is moving in the wrong direction. These are all from Dave Ramsey. The next statistics I found from all sorts of investment and financial advisors around the internet. 40% of Americans cannot cover a $400 emergency expense. The average credit card debt for an American household is $8,942. 33% of Americans have no retirement savings at all. The average household owns 300,000 items. Now just think about that. In light of the credit card debt, in light of the lack of retirement savings, the average household owns 300,000 items, which then leads to the next statistics, which is fascinating. 10% of American households own a storage unit. And this is all while houses are getting bigger, right? Your grandma did not have the size house that you have, most likely, right? And yet we need storage units to place our stuff. And this is one of my favorite ones. The average person spends $220 a year on the lottery. Now, I've got issues with the lottery, I do. My favorite joke about the lottery is actually from Dave Ramsey, if you know Dave Ramsey. He says that the lottery is a tax on people who are bad at math. That's a good joke. That's a good joke. The lottery, really, like if you want to get serious, is often a tax on the poorest people that we can't tax in the first place, right? The desperation to get out of their poverty causes them to pay into the lottery with very, very little chance of return of investment. And so I'll remind you again of our fears. We're talking about financial security and losing everything, but these are the fears of 2024. Next week, we're going to talk about death, because death is intertwined with a lot of these. People I love dying, see people die in war, all of that sort of stuff. But again, financial ruin. Number 6, not having enough money for the future. And according to this study at Chapman University, 55.7% of Americans are afraid that they don't have enough money for the future. This is a significant concern in our culture. This is a significant fear that many people have. Now, we've had a theme verse I'm going to read every single day this month during this sermon series, again, because I want to remind you, even though we just raised the temperature of our fear, that Jesus tells us that we don't have to worry. He challenges us, in fact, to not worry. So let's look at these words again in Matthew chapter 6. I know I have a love-hate relationship with this text because there's a calming effect. Jesus says not to worry, and I think, okay, I can trust Jesus. I don't have to worry. But again, I love worrying so much that I also feel challenged by it, that I really need to lower my temperature about worrying about the future. And so I feel this tension every time I read these words of Jesus. He says, "Therefore I will tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body, what you will wear. Is not life more than food and the body more than clothes? Look at the birds of the air. They do not sow or reap or store away in barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more valuable than they? Can any one of you, by worrying, add a single hour to your life? And why do you worry about clothes? See how the flowers of the field grow. They do not labor or spin, and yet I tell you that not even Solomon in all of his splendor was dressed like one of these. If that is how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and tomorrow is thrown into the fire, will he not much more clothe you, you of little faith? So do not worry, saying, what shall we eat, or what shall we drink, or what shall we wear? For the pagans run after all of these things, and your heavenly Father knows that you need them. But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all of these things will be given to you as well. Therefore, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. These words are powerful. There's no promise here that we're not going to have trouble. But the promise is that God shows up when we have trouble. When things get difficult, when things get hard, God will show up. I want to walk through some of what the Old Testament has to say and some of what the New Testament has to say about money. Again, it never promises that we're going to be okay financially. It never promises that everything is going to be easy. It never promises the opposite of what we're afraid of. But it gives us hope, and it encourages us to plan and anticipate for the possibilities of that which we might be afraid of. And so first I want to walk through a couple Proverbs, because the Proverbs have a lot to say about money. I've chosen just 2 Proverbs to talk about because both of them have this theme of diligence and responsibility. And you can find this up and down the Proverbs. I've just chosen 2 because, again, I get the hint you don't want to be here all day, and I respect that. But let's walk through these 2 Proverbs about money that I found. The first one, the plans of the diligent lead to profit, and surely as haste leads to poverty. This is great advice here, that if you want to have plenty, to be diligent. And if you are afraid of poverty, avoid hastiness, avoid reactionary. And so if you are truly afraid of losing everything, a realistic fear, the proverb is encouraging plans and diligence in this moment where you haven't yet lost everything. Plan, prepare. Don't just wait until this future that's unknown comes, because if you're not planned and prepped for it, it will hurt. The second proverb I want to read is from Proverbs 13:11. Dishonest money dwindles away, but whoever gathers money little by little makes it grow. Again, this isn't the advice we always want to hear, right? We want to hear, how do I win the lottery? How does my big idea turn into an entrepreneurial success? How can I become the next Apple? How can I become the next Google? We want the shortcuts and the big payoffs. But this is a great reminder that dishonest money dwindles away. But really, if you want to see your money grow, work little by little. Save. Take your time. Be careful with what you do have. There's a story that I read this week about Benjamin Franklin. I'm sure you're very familiar of all the wild stories of his life. But this story shocked me. I'd never heard this one before. And it's a great reminder of that last text. He was fascinated by compound interest. If you don't know what compound interest is, I don't have time to explain it to you right now. But basically the concept is the longer the money sits, the more it grows, right? And so he's fascinated by compound interest. So in his dying will, he gave 2 cities very close to his heart 2,000 pounds sterling, right? We didn't have the robust American dollar, and so this was the British money, right? 2,000 pounds sterlings to Boston and to Philadelphia. And you're probably thinking from your 2025 mind, those city governments could go through 2,000 pounds like this. That's nothing. Well, what he wanted to do was to put to test how much that money could turn into. And so he told the cities that they were not allowed to spend it for 100 years. So 100 years later, they were able to take 75% of that money and start giving it as loans to entrepreneurs and people who had ideas in the city to start building businesses. But that they had to keep back 25% in the earnings to that point and put it away for another 100 years. And so after 200 years, after Benjamin Franklin's death, those two cities opened their accounts, and Philadelphia had earned $2 million, and Boston had earned $6.5 million from 2,000 pound sterling investments from Benjamin Franklin upon his death. That's the way that compound interest can work. And he has this idea that slow and steady brings value, that the proverb is right, that he could have left 10% of his wealth to those cities and it would have been gone immediately. But instead, he let the money work as a legacy long after his death, to the point that he funded some things that are still happening in both those cities today, working towards building up youth in education in the sciences. There are also proverbs that go on to link generosity to financial well-being. An example of that is Proverbs 22:9. The generous will themselves be blessed, for they share their food with the poor. Proverbs 11:25 carries on a similar theme. A generous person will prosper. Whoever refreshes others will be refreshed. This idea that if you're concerned about your future, using your moment of plenty to be a generous person sets you up for that future, right? You will find blessing in your generosity. God responds to generosity by being generous to you as well. And I think the New Testament will pick up on this theme as well, because the New Testament is trying often to understand and to think about, what are we going to do with this story that Jesus of Nazareth is the Messiah who was crucified, dead, and buried. And in real time, they're writing letters to each other, trying to figure out what this life is going to look like on the other side of that. And oftentimes, that means trying to establish churches. And in the establishment of churches, one of the themes that arises over and over and over is these communities ought to be places of generosity that help care for each other, especially as in the season of the New Testament, as opposed to the Old Testament, where we're talking about inside of Israel, where there's a state religion and the temple in the capital city is dedicated to your God. The New Testament is about going out into the world, and your establishment of the church could be dangerous. If you are found out, you could lose your job, you could lose your house, you could lose your money, you could lose your life. And so in that danger, they understand the concern of financial well-being, and they understand how they need each other in order to thrive in the economy of their day. The New Testament will do two things, I think, when it comes to money. One, it'll warn about the love of money, and two, it encourages us to share with each other to make sure that we take care of each other. And I wonder if one of the solutions to our concern, which is very legitimate about financial ruin, is leveraging generosity within the church for others while we have, and find that when the moment might come that we have not, the church is ready to rally around us as individuals. And so collectively, we can support and help one another. First, I want to talk about this first one. The New Testament warns against the love of money. One of the most famous verses is 1 Timothy 6:10, which says, "For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil," which I'm going to pause there because there's a couple things that crack me up about this. First of all, there are people who love to point out that money is not the root of all evil in this text. You know, that's a really funny cop-out, I think. It doesn't say money is the root of all evil. It says love of money. I don't love money. I just want it, right? That always cracks me up. The second one is, it doesn't actually say that the love of money is the root of all evil. It's not the root of all evil. It's the root of all kinds of evil. And so this is possibly one of the worst quoted scriptures in all of the Bible. For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Some people, eager for money, have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. fascinating that the tie here, the love of all money, isn't just like to shame you for having or using money. The concern here is that the chasing of money draws people from their first love of Jesus Christ. The concern is that money in itself can be a replacement god for Jesus. And that is something that we should hold as a mirror on our own life. Do we allow money to do for us that which God should be doing? Do we trust our future in money, or do we trust our future in God? Does our spending pattern look like the world because we're afraid of the future, or does our spending pattern look like a testimony of trust that God has our future contained for us? And so, really, we should really hold this up as a mirror against ourselves to say, what is it that we're doing with money? What are we trying to accomplish with money? Why are we chasing after money? Who does money make us out to be? These are questions that are intensely important for our discipleship of Jesus. The next one I want to show you is from Hebrews chapter 13, verses 5 to 6. Keep your lives free from the love of money, and be content with what you have, because God has said, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. So we say with confidence, the Lord is my helper. I will not be afraid. What can mere mortals do to me? If you come here today with very reasonable financial concerns, if you're concerned about the direction of the economy, if you're concerned about your lack of retirement, if you're concerned that jobs are going away, if you're concerned about whatever it is you're concerned about, let these verses speak to you as a reminder. God says, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. And he says this in connection with money. The future is unknown. Any day now, the stock market may collapse to nothing, and jobs may disappear, and we may be in famine, and we may be in trouble. Who knows? It's possible. But God reminds us over and over and over through the scriptures that he will not leave us. So whatever it is, whatever the worst case scenario you can make up in your mind is, God's promise is he will join you in the struggle. He'll be there. He sees our struggles. He sees our futures that may not be secure. He sees them. And God says, I will meet you there. I will help you. I will show up. And then the question ends, if the Lord is my helper, what could mere mortals do to me? What possibly could happen to me if the Lord is with me? God sees our anxieties and our fears. God sees the economic ups and downs in our world. God sees it all. And God says he'll join us in the seasons of plenty, and he'll join us in the seasons of want. The New Testament also calls us to generosity. And this is the last thing I want to talk about. Acts chapter 2 and chapter 4, very early in the story of the church, remind us that the church is gathering together nightly. And they're doing so around tables, sharing food with each other. And we're told that everyone held everything in common, to the point that whenever someone sold a piece of property, they didn't stick it in their bank account. They brought it to the apostles' feet and said, let's serve each other with this money. And the testimony in Acts chapter 2 and 4 is that nobody had want. Everyone was taken care of. And listen, I'm not going to follow that up by suggesting that we become First Socialist Church of Ellicott City. I'm not going to start demanding 100% of your money. I swear I'm not. But sometimes I am compelled by reading this and thinking, why do I struggle with generosity so much? When the earliest forefathers of our faith didn't ask the question of, should I give 10% of my gross or net? Yeah. Should I give 10% of my gross or net? That's not the question they were asking. They were saying, do I have more land I could sell to take care of others? What a radically different question. And the story in chapter 2 ends with, and the Lord added converts to the way of Jesus every single day. There is this tying of this radical generosity with people's lives being changed by coming to know Jesus. And this way of giving everything for the sake of the gospel, for the sake of the church, led to people not only having material needs met, but their spiritual lives was turned upside down for the better because of the generosity of the early church. And I want to say to you as well that our church is a generous church. I am so thankful for the generosity of this church, in fact. We have so many stories of people who give to our congregation. We have a benevolence fund in our church that's always stocked, and we try to give it away generously to people. We have stories of people both inside of our congregation and then also people of our community who have come to us in times of incredible need, and we have been able to help. There are stories of a young man who recently came out of prison, and he was riding the bus to and from work, but because of the time it took him to get on the bus, he didn't have time to rebuild his relationship with his child. And so he wanted to buy a car for $2,000. And he came to us for help, but he was insistent that he didn't just want a handout, he wanted to work. And so he would be here during off hours where he wasn't at work, scrubbing floors and putting things together for us so that he could earn money to the point of $2,000 so that he could buy a car that he could now drive himself to work, save hours a week, and use that time towards rebuilding his relationship with his kid. We have folks in our church who are heading rapidly towards retirement without anything saved. And their biggest asset is the place that they live. And so we have gentlemen in our church who are going and trying to help them fix that up so that they could sell it for a big return so that they could have something to fund their retirement as they move into a retirement place. We have cared for people with cancer. We've helped people find rides to the hospital. Story after story, I could go on and on and on and on about things we've done because of the generosity of the people in this church. And that is, for me, a New Testament call. What we're called to be is to be generous. And as the church, we're trying our hardest to take this money and to make a tangible difference in people's lives. And what we're doing, hopefully, is receiving from people who are in times of plenty so that we can give to people who are in times of need, trusting that if the time ever comes to you that you're the person who's in need, that we'll be able to help you as well. That there will have been people who have been generous in this church in their time of plenty, that they can then help you in your time of want. This, to me, is the best application of Acts chapter 2 and chapter 4, is the way we can help stave off the fear of financial ruin is to be generous in our times of have, so that we can also be there for you when you have times of need and times of want. And so if I could wrap this up for you, just a couple things. These are my personal musings, having spent all week sitting with this concept of money, reading hundreds of Bible verses on it. This, for me, is the takeaway for you that I want to remind you of today. First and foremost is, do not tie your value as a person, as a child of God, to your bank account. You are not better, you're not more moral, you're not pleasing God more if your bank account is higher or if your bank account is lower. You are more than what your bank account says to you. Second of all, give generously in seasons of plenty. I can't promise that it's going to be like for like, but my observation is that people who are generous in times of plenty have people rally around them when life gets difficult, especially within the church. My observation is that people who are generous when they have are supported and cared for and loved when things fall apart. So be generous in a season of plenty. Number 3, be plugged into a community where you can be generous. There are so many swindlers in our world today. I'm sure you're the same. I probably get 5 bogus phone calls a week and 20 bogus emails a week telling me that my card failed in some state I've never lived in, and if I give them a phone call, then they'll take my card number to make sure they get it right. Like all of these, there's so many swindlers in our world. Be plugged into a community that you can trust, where you can be generous. And then I think the final one, the fourth one, discover that when you are generous, when you have, that those in your community will be generous with you when you have not. So it's not a perfect retirement plan. It's not a perfect full safe plan. But it seems to me the best walking away that we can do is, if we're not yet in that place of financial ruin, but we're afraid of it, let's not hoard in anticipation of fear. But let's be generous while God is being generous to us, and trust that God's word is true, that he will care for us, that the church will care for us if and when our time of struggle comes. We're going to sing a final song as we close today. As a response, you may feel a sense of anxiety about finances, and I don't want there to be any shame in that at all. Over half of Americans feel it. If that's you today, take some time to pray. The altar is open. Seek God's help. Seek God's direction. Seek others in the church. Let's not be ashamed of this stuff, but let's be helpful for each other. Let's care for each other. And I think more than anything, that could be our plan for a tenuous future. Would you stand with me as we sing this final song?